Alrighty. Those intros are getting interesting. Trying to map all this out.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
guys. Go on.
Yeah, it takes some time to get used to with this YouTube stuff.
All right, for anybody watching, this is my conversation with Jake. He is the Muslim Metaphysician. Look for him on YouTube. He pounds things like the Trinity incarnation into our Christian heads, and then we have to get good answers and reasons and things to talk to him about. So, Jake, I know you're short on time, and I'm short on time. We ran this kind of a little bit later than what was intended. So we'll kind of get in the nitty gritty. What was your like walking from Christianity to Islam? Can you just give us like an overview?
Yeah, sure. So appreciate you having me on, James. And, James and I talk quite frequently, so we've become friends over the past year or so. But yeah, my kind of journey to Islam was, it took a bit of time, but I was raised as a Roman Catholic in a Roman Catholic home. My parents weren't overly religious, but I went to Catholic school growing up for a few years, and we used to go to church on, the main holidays, that sort of Catholicism for those who are familiar. And when I started getting older and thinking about these things more, on my own, like when I was a teenager and younger than that, I didn't really have this kind of mindset of thinking deeply about God and the big questions. But towards the end of my high school years and then going into college, I started thinking about these things much more on a deeper level. And in doing so, some key things just didn't make sense to me from Christianity. And we can maybe go into those a little bit if need be. But just an overall thing, a few things didn't make sense to me. I was introduced to the religion of Islam by one of my good friends in high school. And I originally started reading the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book, with the intent to refute my friend because I thought what he was saying was wrong. And I didn't really know much about the religion, but as I read the book more and more, it grew on me and a lot of it made sense. So at a basic level, it was just because a lot of key things that didn't make sense for me in Christianity, the Quran cleared up and made much more sense to me. And so I became a Muslim in light of reading the Quran. And originally, just again, a quick summary, I became what's called a Quranist Muslim. I was in that position, which is kind of like sola scriptura, almost Protestant-like, for about 6 to 8 years. It's a bit fuzzy during the time period. And then over the past 2 years or so, I transitioned into becoming a traditional Sunni Muslim, in which I accept the Quran, which is a holy book, and then another source, which is called the Sunnah, which are basically the sayings and deeds of the Prophet Muhammad. And and that's where I'm at now. Been that way for the past 2 years.
Yep, no, that's some good background. That way anybody can kind of know and gauge where you are.
Yeah.
One thing I've appreciated about talking to you, Jake, is with epistemology and being how we know what we know. Like, I don't think I knew anything about metaphysics until I met you. Like, I even asked you, what does metaphysician mean? Like, I thought maybe magician. Like Jake's gonna pop a rabbit out of his hat. So maybe if you want to explain what metaphysics is to anybody watching and how you've enjoyed that and you've been pounding some of these concepts into my head.
Right. So metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. There's a few different branches in philosophy: epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, things like that. So metaphysics is one of the major branches in traditional philosophy, going all the way back to people like Aristotle. And just a fun fact, people may be interested to know, the name metaphysics actually originates because there was an editor in the first few centuries, I forget exact when, maybe second century after Christ, who was editing a work or a group of works on Aristotle. And Aristotle had this book called the Physics. But then he had other, and naturally it was related to things that we know today in the realm of physics, the science. But then he also had other like philosophical works that were, more related to philosophy rather than science. And this compiler of Aristotle's works, he put Aristotle's book, which was called the Physics, in the beginning of this larger collection that he was putting together. And then he put these sort of philosophical works after Aristotle's book called the Physics. And so that's where the name came from. It didn't really have to do, I'm just explaining the etymology of the word. Meta means sort of after, and physics. And so it became known, the subject matter of Aristotle's works became known as metaphysics because it literally came after Aristotle's book, Physics, in the work that this editor was putting together. And this compilation that the editor put together became popularized. And so then everybody just started calling the subject matter that Aristotle wrote on, that appeared literally after his work, the Physics, in the book, people started calling it metaphysics because it came after that. So originally it didn't really have to do so much with the subject matter of where the word came from. But nowadays, metaphysics really deals with questions of ontology, and basically what's the study of being, the bare bones of reality, so to speak. What is reality? It deals with things like causation, free will, questions about God, whether or not God exists, which is for believers in God is the fundamental reality. And so these are the type of questions that nowadays metaphysics deals with. And so that's I'm the Muslim metaphysician because, as I explained, I'm Muslim, and metaphysician because that's kind of what my area of interest and study is primarily in the subject of metaphysics, philosophy of religion, questions about God and different models of God and who he is, more so over and against other philosophical categories like ethics and things like that. I do have a little bit of interest in, but I'm not so well read on it as I am with metaphysics. So that's why I'm Jake, the Muslim metaphysician.
And one thing I've appreciated about our conversations is you're not just trying to kick a puppy. And I'll give an example for the audience. So if you run into somebody who doesn't really know the subject matter, you're not just like, okay, I'm going to squash this guy, but you start teaching them different things. Like when we talk about the Trinity and social Trinitarianism, Latin Trinitarianism, and then we go into elements of identity and classic ways that Christians in the concept of the Trinity can violate that law. I really appreciate like that you throw books and you do like, hey, go read this and then we can talk more. I think sometimes in chat or conversations, I almost see you arguing for the Trinity as a way to educate that person up to that level.
Yeah. And I mean, I have even mentioned in the past, they have these things sometimes called like devil's advocate debates, where you take an opposing side that you don't necessarily agree with the position, but you try to represent it and argue for it as best as you can. And I think sometimes that's a good thing, because then it shows the honesty, I think, in the person of trying to accurately represent the view, even if you disagree with it. And it really challenges you to think even about your own beliefs. And so that's what I try to do, because just maybe a little bit of background. What happened to me was, Now, obviously, I'm not a Trinitarian because as Muslims, we don't believe in something like the Trinity. We believe in sort of the absolute oneness of God. But what happened to me is that the Trinity didn't make sense to me just on a basic level, but I couldn't explain why. And when I started studying philosophy in university, I studied things like symbolic logic, which give you a clear way of trying to break things down to a fine powder and explain, or give an argument for what you believe or an argument against what you don't believe. And what happened to me was I found myself not believing in the Trinity, but I couldn't really express exactly why. And that bothered me. I just would say, well, it just doesn't make sense. But I felt that wasn't really fair. I had to study these things and say, well, maybe does it make sense? Or if it doesn't, I should have a clearer and better way of explaining to people why I don't believe in it. So I started studying a lot of these books. I forwarded some of them to people like James who are interested in the subject. And I started reading more and more. And I came across, and Christians, some people attack me for this, of things like the logical problem of the Trinity. It's not something that I came up with. Like on the book that I sent James, it's literally on the first page in the book. And reading these things gave me a chance to say, well, here's what Christians really believe, and where is my problem with it or not. And it allowed me to get rid of what were a lot of bad arguments against the Trinity and see maybe the arguments that I did agree with, and now I do still agree with, that are much better, what I feel, against the doctrine of the Trinity. But at the same time, most people, and I'm willing to say this, including Muslims who critique the Trinity, they don't really understand what it is. They don't really understand how to properly critique the Trinity. And they may say some very basic things like, well, it just doesn't make sense, or it's too complicated. But that's not enough to really convey to people why you don't believe in it. So that bothered me, and I've launched into this kind of research of looking into it and trying to better understand what it's about, and maybe if I disagree with it, why I don't agree with it. And that has helped me to have conversations with Christians. And I think it's a good thing to really study even things that we don't necessarily agree with in a much deeper fashion, so that we can understand and communicate with other people better.
No, that's good. I think that there's a danger in these conversations of not elevating it so much. Like, and you and I have talked about this, to where we can be very superficial with these discussions, or we can go really into the nitty gritty. Like, you and I could not really want to dig into it, and we could be arguing for 5 hours on a live. Does an egg fit the Trinity? But if you know anything about the subject, an egg is a terrible analogy. So if you're a Christian watching, please don't use it. PM me and I'll explain to you why, but don't use it. But then it's just understanding, like, what are you meaning by person? And we find out it's not as simple. Or what do you mean by being? But and actually, this is another throwback to Jake's channel. If you're a Christian who watches this video now or watches it later, check out some of the interviews with Dr. Josh, Dr. Mullins. And then there's some books I can recommend too.
Yeah. And also, I see there's some Muslims in the chat. James just recently started this channel. So if you like religious conversations and debates and stuff like that in general, do consider subscribing to his channel and hit the notification bell so you can get updates. And like I said, James is a Christian, but I think as Muslims, there's no problem in watching content from other people that we don't necessarily agree with, to try to understand their view better and to be able to better communicate with people. So yeah, do consider subscribing to James's channel. He's got some interesting debates and conversations on here already.
Yeah, just to plug one thing future, I've got Grandmappy gave me a soft confirmation for coming on the channel. Try to set that up coming up. Sharif
Yeah.
from TAP being the Thought Adventure podcast. He'll be on this Thursday with me. Similar
Yeah.
style conversation. You guys will potentially see me interacting with, God willing, some of the EF Dawa people have given me a soft commitment. So I want to have these interfaith dialogues because I want to not only elevate the conversation, but I want to elevate the respect within the conversation. No name calling, no insulting, no gish galloping for 10 minutes, and then the other person gets like a quick thing to say. Like, we want this to be something, because if it's not something, then I tell everybody what, I'll log right off and I'll never be on YouTube again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so and James also has made some rounds on different shows. Like we have another friend, Justin from the EA show. He's had some people on, and James has been there interacting with some, big name atheists like Graham Oppie. He's already briefly interacted with him, Aaron Ra, and Matt Dillahunty, a bunch of different people. So, like I said, if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff in general, do consider subscribing and looking out for more stuff from James in the future.
I just happened to read the comments. I died laughing. Princess, I loved that comment. It says James is tired, so don't waste his time.
That's funny.
That's a fit. That could be a tagline. I can thank you if I ever use that tagline.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. And she said earlier too, Jake is quoting me now. I don't get it. And I wasn't picking on you or anybody in particular, because I think a lot of people are like that. Even Christians may believe in it and not really understand it. And I think James would agree with that. And I'm just saying that whether we agree with something or not, if we believe in it, we should try to understand it and know why we believe in it. And if we don't believe in something, we should try to understand it and know why we don't believe in it, and try to be as clear about that as possible one way or another. So, yeah, I had the same issue. I think everyone does to a certain degree with their own beliefs. So it's nothing to do specifically with the Trinity. It's, in general, we should always try to best understand what we believe in other people and why we do. So, yeah.
And to answer a question from the chat, I do apologize. I won't be able to add anybody to today's chat. Jake has a very limited time, and I try to keep the interviews about 30 minutes, maybe. Sometime when Jake has a free moment, I can bring him back on and do question and answer, or like and subscribe to his channel, because he does do videos, and you can get question and answer there as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Definitely check out my channel if you haven't already. You guys might be interested in that. Yeah, I'm just trying to read along with the comments, see what's going on.
Yeah, I'm very interested as you move off of picking on us Christians and you start moving over to picking on atheists. Like, I'm just looking for those videos to come, to start coming, Jake. So I am curious, what would be like one of the first topics you want to hit as we start going to address atheism?
Yeah, so on my channel in particular, I have a couple videos on atheism. I have a series that I started, but I kind of abandoned it, called Atheism is Absurd, and I had 2 videos on that. And then I had a video with Graham Oppie, where James and I kind of tag teamed on Mr. Oppie, and we had a conversation with him. So, and I did a review of that video. But yeah, as James said, I do plan on getting more into sort of deconstructing atheism. And I think James would agree with me on this, that we both agree that atheism is an incorrect position. And atheism is on the rise. especially in the West, in places like Europe and even in the U.S. So I think it's something that really needs to be combated. And we've done a little bit of that on tap because I'm also part of a podcast with 3 other Muslim brothers. It's called Thought Adventure Podcast. And on that, we've done a couple, maybe I think the majority of our videos has actually been combating atheism. We did one on proof for necessary being. The one that we just did on Sunday was trying to show that the necessary being is God. So that was another one. And then we also did one on consciousness, trying to explain how consciousness cannot be reduced to material and is something that is immaterial in nature. And that we feel is problematic for an atheist to really account for consciousness. So I'll be hitting on some of those same points on my channel regarding atheism. I think a fundamental point, which we didn't really hit on as much, is you have to deconstruct an atheist epistemology. And what I mean by that is epistemology is basically knowledge, the study of knowledge, how we know what we know, what knowledge even is. And I think atheists have a skewed epistemology, so that if they start off with the epistemology that they have, they'll never really conclude that God exists because their methodology doesn't allow for them to really even get to that. So I think you have to start off earlier before even showing arguments for God's existence. You have to demonstrate or explain to them why their epistemology is flawed. And why I say it's flawed is because they tend to be very strict empiricists, which means basically they rely on science and physical evidence to prove or believe that something is real or exists. And what I try to do is I say, well, that's one way of attaining knowledge, but it's not the only way. We have things like rational arguments or even common experiences that all humans have. These are legitimate sources of knowledge. So, for example, in philosophy, you have problems like whether or not other minds exist, whether or not physical reality outside of you is real, or we're just like in a matrix or something like that. And these sort of or things like free will that we all experience, these sort of, even consciousness, I would argue, these sort of philosophical issues cannot be examined really in a strict, hard naturalist or scientific way. And so what I try to do is I try to point out to atheists that, look, you say you can't believe in God, that God exists because you can't see him under a microscope or something like that. But at the same time, you can't disprove what's called hard solipsism, or basically that you're the only mind that exists and everything outside of you is illusory. You can't prove that position by a scientific method. But yet you believe, like when I look at this computer screen, I see James is tired there as a real person. He's not a figment of my imagination. But that's on the basis of my experience. It's not on the basis of some hard scientific proof that I can give, because I can just add to the thought experiment and say, well, there's this evil genius who created this matrix, and he's implanted within my mind the illusion of these memories that I have with James, but they're not actually real. And he recreates me every 5 minutes so that I believe these things actually happen, but they're not real. All of this is theoretically, or on a very broad theoretical basis, they're all logically possible. But at the end of the day, are they actually probable? Do we believe in them? No. And one of the reasons why is because of what's called in epistemology of what Richard Swinburne, who's a Christian, calls the principle of credulity, which basically says that I am justified in believing whatever I experience unless I have demonstrable reason to deny it or to discount it. So things like I experience my consciousness, I experience or I experience that I have a conscious experience of the physical world. I see James on the screen. I have no reason to doubt that he's a real person. I experience that I have free will. I've experienced even of ethical and a moral realm. So these things, I'm saying, if an atheist is really consistent with his epistemology, he would have to reject all of those or agree that there's another way apart from the hard sciences that we can know things and be sure that these things are real and that they exist. Now, if you grant me that, then now I can have this further conversation about rational arguments and proofs of deducing from the natural world, from things like the Kalam cosmological argument or the contingency argument, that God is real. So that's what I try to do, is I try to go to the epistemology first, show how it's flawed. Then once I can get them to agree with me on that, then I show through rational arguments that God exists. So I plan on doing that to flip full circle, James, to your question. I plan on doing that on my YouTube channel, explaining an typical atheist epistemology. What are the sort of problems with it? How do we tackle it? And then once we get them to agree that, their epistemology needs to be refined, then we can proceed with the rational arguments. What are these rational arguments? Which ones are good? Which ones aren't for God's existence? And kind of go through those and explain what the possible objections to these arguments are, and explain why they're not good objections, and then go from there. But yeah, I plan on doing sort of a systematic deconstructing of atheism within the coming months, God willing.
No, that sounds good. As I'm looking at the time, I think we got about 3 minutes left on this stream. I'm trying to think what would put a good bow on this. I think we've hit a lot of the good points that I wanted to hit. The initial engaging in conversation. For example, guys, you're not going to change anyone's mind in a first conversation. And you're not going to change anyone's mind by being rude or obnoxious, but by actually approaching people and showing them, I guess this might be the easiest way to say it. Ask somebody to explain to you their worldview. Describe how they believe in God, how they know what they know, reality, and then do an internal critique on that. Because sometimes I think we look at, okay, I've read a book on Islam, so now I can talk to every Muslim, and that's not going to work for you. Or I've read a book on Christianity, now I can address every Christian. That's not going to work. Sometimes you need to personalize these conversations, and then also bring that academic level, like show them why you're using certain words, or why certain things don't make sense, or even in some cases show them why they're not orthodox.
Yep. I'm just reading some comments as they're going along. Yeah, some guy saying only Christianity can refute atheism. Well, I mean, if that's your view, that's fine. I'd like to talk to this gentleman. He seems a little bit upset. I don't know why. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you there, James. We should ask people questions and not assume things about their worldview, especially when we're not familiar with their worldview or what they believe in. Try to understand them as best as you can, and then based on their own commitments, try to step in their worldview and critique it internally, rather than from the outside and just saying, well, you're wrong because I'm right. No, well, you're wrong maybe because this is the problem with your position. I think this is the best way to really do it, and by asking people questions, we can better understand, and then maybe be in a better position to critique their worldview if need be. Or you may ask questions and you may have been anticipating critiquing their position in a certain way, but then when you get answers, you say, oh no, that clears things up and I don't really need to, that's not a hill I need to really die on with them. But yeah, I think that's the best way, trying to be respectful in conversations. And again, both from a Christian or a Muslim side, don't expect that even if you think you have the truth, that when you speak to someone one time or even a couple times, that if they don't accept what you're saying, that they're somehow being dishonest, or they got their head in the sand.
Mhm.
No, maybe they're listening to what you're saying and they don't agree with you because of a certain reason, or maybe they're mulling it over and they need time to think about it. These things typically have a lot of weight for people's lives, whether social and with families, and all these different kind of implications of embracing a particular worldview. And we can't expect that people are just going to have like a out of body experience on the spot where you present an argument and you're just completely crumbled and submit to your worldview. Like, this isn't a realistic approach. We have to have a sort of realistic approach with people, even if we think we have the truth. So, yeah, I think that's a good way to end the conversation, and just petition people to have this kind of mindset when talking to people from other faiths.
Yep, and I just add, I want to thank my guest Jake for coming on. He had a very tight schedule. When he leaves here, he's going to go yet on another stream. Not to mention he's busy. He's got a wife at home. Princess, thank you for pushing the channel in the chat. She's like and subscribe. I definitely appreciate that. I think I'm at 83 subs. I'm trying to bump over that 100 this month. So I guess,
Yeah.
inshallah, maybe I will. For our
Yeah.
friend who's blowing up the chat, your way or Yahweh tested by fire, send me a private message on Facebook, and I'll actually put you in a chat, and I can have a conversation with you, and maybe get you in contact with Jake, and you can have that dialogue that you are asking for.
Yeah. Because, I mean, he's asking here in the chat, as a metaphysician with caps, can you demonstrate it with caps the reasoning you're employed to reach the conclusion you have, with a bunch of questions and exclamation marks? And the reason I said you're upset, because when you read a message like that, it seems like you're really trying to make a point and you're really emphatic. So yeah, I mean, just as a quick, for me, someone reading that, I don't think that's really the best way to communicate to somebody, because it comes off as very, I don't know, like you really want to have an argument. So yeah, I mean, I'm willing to have I'm willing to have a conversation with with this guy. I think his name is Terry, and I've seen him on other streams on Calamology. And other
they're in
streams
the
like
chat
that.
too. Which, thank you,
You were on there, James, right?
Yep, thank you, Comology, for letting me share the clip when I was on your channel. Please check them out as well. If you find the clip when I was on their channel in the video description, you'll get back to that video and the full conversations.
Yeah, yeah. So, Mr. Terry, we do have I do have my own podcast with 3 other Muslims called Thought Adventure Podcast. And when we have conversations on the topic of Christianity, we do welcome you to come over there and discuss with us, and have a discussion. Or, like you said, you can get in touch with James, and we have private discussions offline that you're free to join as well. So yeah, with that being said, James, I'll let you take the reins.
Yep. All right, guys, I'm gonna get ready to click the outro. I appreciate everybody for coming on.